Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump discussion. This week we're talking about, do you know where to focus as a leader to create momentum and recover quickly? And it's been interesting sort of watching the people sign up this week because obviously it's one of the series of four that we're doing, and lots of people seem to be very interested in this topic. So if you feel free to ask any questions as we're talking along, or challenge anything, or simply add your point of view, we'll be really interested in that. This week I'm joined by Dave. Dave has flown in from Bologna this morning, so he's looking a bit jaded from his
Just to get
Bologna.
home. That was it. Just to get home.
Yeah, just to get home for this. That's all he's done is get back for this. So, Dave, let's kick off because I think there's quite a lot that we can talk about today. So, when everything feels urgent and clients are breathing down your neck, how do you help your team distinguish between what is truly important versus what is just noise?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think we live in a world of noise, H, don't we? It's noise economically, noise politically, noise at your desk. There's just so much going on. I've always found the easiest thing to do was in the one-to-ones with the managers that I had, or if you've got managers who are managing people, get them to write down what's important to them and use that as the basis of a discussion to try to decipher what noise they are faced with. Because there's so much coming at us all the time. Even if you're looking on LinkedIn, you can look at a post and suddenly you see something else and something else, and then you become like a teenager on TikTok, and you hadn't intended to do that at all. It's just the way that it's gone. And discipline is so important, and rigor is so important, but it's so easy to lose. So I would just encourage us as managers, as leaders, to get those that are working alongside us to write down what's important for them, and use that as a basis of a conversation about what needs to be done, what's most urgent, and what can wait.
I think you're right. We live in a very noisy world. There's so much information being chucked at you all the time. And I think what generally happens, I think that people get desperate and they then can't distinguish between what's important and what's noise. And managers usually turn to that, usually work harder, do more calls, spend more time, spec more things out. When in reality, this is the time when the leader needs to sort of take stock, if I could say the word, and look at the difference between quality and quantity. And I think we need to stop working roles where you've got probably less than a 70% chance of filling. Start doing more targeted business development to clients who've bought from you in the past, and stop driving your team to exhaustion by making them hit meaningless KPIs. And I know we're going to talk about KPIs later on. But I think you need to look at your data. Which jobs have you got the highest fill rates off? So why aren't you finding out more jobs like that? Use your data to look at the activities that actually drive success. And everything else then is just, and I think that's the bit you've got to shut yourself off from that noise. And I remember, in the early years of my career when we first had email, and we used to have a go dark session every week where we would turn our emails off, go dark, and start to actually just go back to what we were doing before we had desks with laptops on. You had to then call people, you had to drive things. So it was about thinking about, if you look at what happens and you look at certain clients shout the loudest, but they're usually the worst clients to deal with. They usually have the poor, return rate from jobs, etc., etc. So we should stop working with those clients because that's just noise. But they're forcing you to work with them. And then you said about LinkedIn, how easy it is to get pushed down that rabbit hole, etc. And I think we should stop looking at the things on LinkedIn, such as, there's so much talk at the moment on LinkedIn about people who are doing fixed price work or low percentage margin work, etc. Then, looking at that, there's other things on LinkedIn I've read over the last couple of weeks about every job is precious. But not every job is precious. If you can't fill the job, it's not precious. So I think you should never drop your price, have some pride. I think you need to increase your services to your consultants, and you need to be honest enough to say, stop working that job, don't work that job, don't work with that client. We need to do BD every day and look at that. So it's the interest of quality versus the interest in quantity, and what gives you the most ROI. And I think it's the quality work that gives you the most ROI. And if you focused on that, you would start to see a huge differentiation in your business output and eventually in your P&L as it drops onto the P&L.
I think just to add to that point, a really good question to ask, and we ask these sort of questions when we're mentoring some of the leaders that we're involved with. A really good question to ask is, what have you stopped doing since we last met? If you meet weekly, or I don't know whether you have a daily, but it's a really good question because everybody wants to know what you are doing. But sometimes the things that you stop doing, because that will give you a little bit more time to do something else, whether it's actually a work thing or something else. But what have you stopped doing is a great question to ask someone.
Well, I was thinking about that. If you're going to start doing something, let's say, because I think you should be doing targeted BD every single day. But if you're going to start doing that, what are you going to stop doing? And to me, the obvious reason, the thing to stop doing is stop working jobs that you've got zero chance of placing.
Yeah.
Because you've got zero chance of placing, but you're hanging on to it, and that's the noise that's being created. You're having to call the client. The clients go, "Why aren't you finding people, etc." Actually, you've got zero chance of placing it. Stop it. Stop doing it. Focus on the thing that makes you money.
Yeah.
Here's a slightly different question then. The most recruitment say that relationships are everything, and I'm hearing an awful lot of this from clients, and I'm seeing also a lot of this on LinkedIn. But if that's true, so how many clients are we losing to internal hires who have a zero relationship with their end customer, and they've just been created the market or due to their managers?
Well, I think the TA type roles have been around for a long time, and I really didn't like the phrase. A lot of people used to say, "Oh, TAs are just failed recruiters." Utter rubbish. Most TAs that I've met are very good, intelligent, just like most recruiters are. You've got to understand why the organisation has got TAs. It may be they're on a huge hiring campaign, and there's a cost of sale that's cheaper for them. But most recruitment isn't done by TAs. Most recruitment is done by recruiters working hard at the desk. And there is still a place for a growing agency that can demonstrate value. And I know we'll come on to value, but that can demonstrate value or can work in partnership with TAs. It isn't an us and them. And if you are in a position where you've lost everything out to TAs because they're doing all the recruitment and you used to do it, then you either have to build that relationship back up at the very top level in the organization, or you move on. And many times I've heard people say, "Oh yes, it's all gone to TAs, but they're useless. They won't do as good a job as we do." Well, whatever job you were doing wasn't as valued as you thought it was by the client. So there's a lesson to be learned there. And I think it's just an opportunity. It's a different way of doing recruitment. But for us at the desk, 90% of the companies, less than 10 people, we can build relationships with the clients that we've got. And that relationship should stand you in good stead, whatever changes come from the client's point of view.
It's interesting. So you talk about that relationship, and I've sort of thought about this question quite a bit since writing it. And I think the question is, we need to be honest about what type of relationship we actually have with our client. And we do a session, don't we, about taking it from the basic level right through to advocacy level, etc. There's loads to talk about in there. But the question is, what type of relationship do you have with your client, and how much power does the relationship of the person that you have hold? And normally, when a recruiter, I think, is talking to the bottom person in that decision-making food chain, and therefore that person holds no real making power, and all the power is at the top. And as you said, are you speaking to the top of the chain, the CEO, the MD, etc. of that company? So in reality, if you're talking to those people and they're talking about increasing the quality of recruitment, reducing the cost of recruitment, they think they'll get that better from a TA. If you've got a really good relationship with the power at that level, then maybe you can sway the power and have a conversation. And maybe that still leads them to do TA work, but you'll still end up with doing some work because you've got a better relationship with. But maybe you can sort of create innovation and have a conversation with that person, because we all know that when a TA business is formed, or a section of the business is formed, they haven't got a candidate base. They haven't got a knowledge of what the footfall of the market's like. They tend to do the usual thing. They'll fill all the low-hanging fruit with the hard jobs to fill, etc. There is still massive space for you. But what we do is we have a relationship, or we don't have a relationship with the KPI, the key person of influence in that business. But I think as an owner of a business and as a salesperson with big clients, if you haven't got the KPI right, i.e., you haven't got the relationship with the key person of influence in the business, then the chances are you're going to lose that business when they think of something different or more innovative or more cost saving to do. So I think we should go back about providing quality, innovation to our clients and doing that. So we need to review our relationships with clients, because usually we have the relationship with the weakest link in that management chain. And that's the problem. So, right, I don't think TAs are bad. I think TAs are a good thing in the recruitment market, but we see them as, Beelzebub because they're taking business away. But it's because we've allowed them to do that.
Yeah. And then the companies that we see that grow, Howard, are ones where, we're talking mainly companies with less than 50 people, who have got employ less than 50 people. The key people of influence in those recruitment companies own the relationships with the key customers as they built their business. And obviously their skill, they've got to pass that on to somebody else. They can't be the sole go-to. But there's quite a few companies out there where owners of businesses don't have that many relationships with clients anymore. And that's quite dangerous in a world of noise that we've just spoken about, where everything's changing so quickly.
So I remember having a conversation and winning a very lucrative piece of work from a very large organization where they had 150 internal recruiters and Randstad as an RPO on top.
Yeah, okay.
And what we ended up doing was they couldn't employ a recruitment agency. We became a person of supplying data to the client, but that data happened to be fully qualified candidates that they could take, and we did it at a fixed price per month. But what that meant was that we owned the market.
Yeah.
And we understood that market. So even though that they had 150 internal TAs and Randstad as an RPO on top, there was still a gap in there. And the person that was in charge, it was head of recruitment, global recruitment. He still had to go get sign off, but he had to be able to prove that we weren't supplying recruitment services, but we were just supplying data.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting conversation, and we won the contract, and it was an expensive contract for them for data, but it enabled them to place positions that were critical in their business. Even in that size of business, there are places for you if you innovate and do what you need to do to get there. We were talking about KPIs, and I was talking about KPIs in a different view, as in key person of influence, but let's talk about KPIs in the proper thing. So what's the one metric that most recruitment leaders track religiously, but it actually kills momentum? And what should be the measuring instead?
I don't know whether this kills momentum, but still today, you hear recruitment leaders say, how many calls have you made? How many phone calls have you made? And of course, we know we need to be in contact with our clients and our candidates. But a much better measure is about engagement. And that engagement can come from meetings, it can come from sending reports, it can come from using your data, passing them on to the clients, and building a whole portfolio of things that you give to a client that show value. Just hammering out the phones, and I know that this does work for some companies. I absolutely get that. But I think sometimes that does stop momentum because it doesn't measure in any way the quality. And I know where I come from in my tech background, less and less people answer the phones now. They're looking for other ways of engagement. They're looking for other ways of getting in contact with agencies. You've got to have something to say, and how you craft that is very clever. For example, emails. Starting an email with "Hi, I hope you are well," doesn't have the same impact as starting an email with "Did you know that?" Because somebody's more likely to read it. Did you know that? And you're there as a consultant. You're there giving them advice. So I think I'd encourage people to measure engagement, not just hitting the phones. Although to your point earlier on, the last point, I think it's still important that you have time in your day where you are doing that business development.
It's interesting. I wrote down the same answers. Call times and call numbers to me are still being absolutely rammed down people's necks, and it is not required. And I think the things that you should be looking at is both temp and perm and contract is the number of quality jobs that you have on. So not the number of jobs that you have on,
Yeah.
but the number of jobs that you can actually fill. And there's the thing. And so yeah, I was with a client yesterday, and it was a really interesting conversation. They had about 14, 15 jobs. And when we actually went through those jobs, the jobs they could fill was 3. So I said, there's your number. That's what you should be measuring, is that number 3. And then look at how we can convert that 3 into either 1, 2, or 3 placements. What can we do? And work from there. The rest of them, you're measuring them, and your fill rate is appalling, okay, because you're measuring jobs that you're never ever going to fill. So let's change that and let's look at that. And it's interesting, they've come back today, and from those 3 jobs now, they've only focused on those 3 jobs, started focusing yesterday afternoon. They've generated CVs out. One of them's already started to create interviews. Well, you go back to some of the clients that we've been dealing with on a joint basis. Yeah, it's the same thing. They're trying to measure everything rather than what's really important. And if I know if I had 3 quality jobs on this week, then I should get a minimum of 1 placement. If I get 3 quality jobs on every single week, that's a placement every single week. That's 4 placements in a month.
Yeah.
And, irrespective of that, now in temp, that will rise, okay, because of the more temp, the more fluid the temp, etc. But over a period of time, that starts to really come in. Now, if you then start to build and say, I want 10 quality jobs every single week, then all of a sudden, that's a very different place to be. Yeah. Because if you look at the UK, and I'm going to talk about this a bit later on, you talk about the UK rate of placement, it's only 19%.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And that's including companies that have got an 80, 90% fill rate, and including the companies that have got a 10 less fill rate. 19% says that we are wasting a massive amount of time measuring things that never make us any money.
Yeah, agree.
So if everyone talks about adding value to a client, but most recruitment companies that we see, doesn't matter what market in, offer the same type of service. What examples of genuine value that recruitment agencies should be supplying would you be able to sort of implement that your competitors would be struggling to copy?
Well, I'm working with a company right now, and this is mainly on permanent placements, but they do a PR, what they call a placement review. After every successful permanent placement, they undertake to write a report. It's a page or 2 at the most on what they did to fill that job. And it's consistently reminding the client of what we do as recruiters. Because sometimes I think we forget, if we are only working on 1 out of every 5 from a success point of view, make sure that the 1 out of every 5, you're reminding your client, this is what it's like to be a recruiter in today's market. You've got to sift through a lot of stuff. You've got to have a number of conversations about getting them out there. The old line that we used to use when clients used to say, "Oh, I've got the internet now," and LinkedIn's come along and all of this sort of stuff. It's easy to find people, and of course the answer was always, it may be easy to find them. You try to get them out. And again, I'm talking mainly about permanent contract, but you try to get them out. That conversation, somebody's got to have that. And I think the placement review that this company does is a really good reminder of, actually, this is what we've undertaken on your behalf. Yes, you've paid us a fee, we find you the person, but they do it consistently and it's part of their DNA. And I think it's a really good thing. And I know that their clients value it because I've spoken to a couple of their clients. And when we talk about things you can do to add value, those sort of things are really good.
Interesting. I'm working with a client up in the Northeast. The client came to me and we started to work together. This person has no recruitment experience whatsoever.
Okay.
Has entered the market in her specific niche and purely wants to service clients because she feels that they didn't get the service that they deserve. And so she's got a really interesting viewpoint on supplying temp workers. She'll go to every temp client. She wants to know the behavioral value. She wants to know what they're doing from a behavioral, like how they interact with the team, etc. And if she hasn't got someone that she believes matches that behavioral value, won't send a CV.
No.
She'll tell the client that. And it's interesting in her marketplace, how many clients have come to her and said, I understand that you do this. You don't just put a bum on the seat. You want the right person. We want to work with you. She's probably 5 to 10% higher than every other recruitment agency in her marketplace in her same area. And clients are coming to her for that. The local government body that runs that part have also come to her and asked to partner with her because of the quality of the candidates that she supplied and the fact that she says no to supplying rubbish. And it's a really interesting thing. So she could be making 4 or 5 more placements every single month in that sort of marketplace, but she's not. But what she's doing is growing a far better bank of clients based on quality and based on service, rather than just applying a temp because I've got a temp and he's got 2 legs, she's got 2 arms, and I can put that temp across the threshold. No, they have to meet a certain criteria, and it's all about that marketplace and how that marketplace interacts. So if the person hasn't got experience within what they're doing and how they're doing it, etc., 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 low-end marketplace, then that, and she's pulling up trees in that marketplace because of that focus. It's very hard for most recruitment companies to copy that, because they're so, no, just put a bum across the seat, just put a bum across, just put a bum across. Oh, they've left 2 days later, they've left 3 days later, or they've disappeared, etc. She makes a purpose point. And I think she was talking about, she's now up to sort of 35, 40 contractors out. And she was talking about that she only has a 2% attrition rate, which you think about in that temp market is absolutely magnificent, because it's all based on the quality of the candidate she puts in. So she looks at it as almost as a permanent job based on values and terms, and does that.
And it's your point, because the point you made at the very beginning, Howard, was that she doesn't come from a recruitment background. So was there something that she saw that we as recruiters aren't doing, that she thought, actually, I'm going to take a different approach?
But when she was working in the market that she was working in, she was fed up of temps just coming in, taking money, providing no value to that market, no value to the people within that market. They were just there as a holding bay more than anything else, doing whatever it is they thought they should be doing, but not actually adding value. When you start to think about the value that that temp could or should add, that's where she's making the difference, because the temp is adding huge value to the end client, not just someone coming in doing a 9 to 5 and walking out again. And that's the difference from the other end, and wants to completely change the way that that market runs.
Yeah, good.
So this is going to be an interesting question, Dave, because we do this all the time. You walk into a recruitment business where the owner says, we need more leads. And we always talk about what their conversion rate, and their conversion rate is really, really low usually. But do you fix the leads problem, or do you fix the conversion problem first?
Well, if your conversion is 2%, then clearly that is unacceptable, because that means you're working on either the wrong job, the wrong culture, the wrong clients. Something is amiss. And essentially, if you're working with A-list clients on A-list jobs, and that's a greater percentage of your time, and your conversion is very low, then that has to be addressed. Because if you've got the right clients and the right jobs, but you're not converting them, then that's something that needs work on. But across the board, there are some jobs, and you've already said this, Ed, you shouldn't be working on at all. And that will be skewing your conversion rate anyway, because you're working on jobs that you're not likely to fill. Fill more of the A-list ones with the A-list clients. In a time where, go back to the noise, where there are less jobs, then each job potentially at the desk becomes more valuable, but it doesn't make it more valuable. It could still be a complete waste of a job. It could be that you're one of 7 on a PSL, and you're not even one of the top 5 of that PSL, and the margin's very low, and the time between when you get paid is 50 days or something like that. So your FD's doing something and saying this isn't really good business. They're the ones that need to go to be able to focus on better jobs with better clients, and therefore up the conversion rate. And as you work more with candidates that are more loyal to you, that you're working hard with them, you also find that you get better leads because you know where people are going, you know where they've come. And LinkedIn today is a really good example. You can see where people are moving around. You can see where vacancies have been created, new people are starting. There's so many ways of doing BD today that is somewhat easier than it was in the past when it was just about bashing phones. So I would say you've got to look at the conversion rate, but before you look at the rate, you've got to look at what you're working on.
So I always think you're a product of where you swim. You swim in a little pool, and that little pool is full of poor qualified clients, poor qualified candidates, etc. Guess what? You're going to get poor qualified leads. There's your problem. So you're going to keep recycling where you're swimming and never get anywhere better. And so I think it goes back to what we said in question one. If the average conversion rate is 19% in the UK, then what you're saying is absolutely right. We should be working jobs that we can fill. I've got clients who are working, filling north of 70% of the jobs, and that's both temp and perm. They're not worried about leads. What they're worried about is maximizing the skill set of the people sat in their business. Maximizing their skill set isn't working on jobs that they've never got a chance to fill. That's not maximizing the skill set. That's wasting time, and it's the time that you can't buy. And if you're not getting a return on investment of that time, then why are you investing in that time? So to me, it's about we're worrying about the wrong thing. We're worried about our leads and conversion rates when we should be actually worried about what we're actually working, what we're trying to do. So if you can generate better requirements because you're speaking to better quality candidates, better quality clients, and guess what? You're going to get better quality leads. And that's the bit where you start to think that starts to that momentum moving forward and people start there. So if people are making regular placement, it creates momentum. If people are getting work with really good clients, it creates momentum. You're only filling 19% of jobs. That doesn't create momentum. That slows momentum down. So we've got to start to think we've got to start wasting our time because time's the only thing that we can't buy. Stop wasting time investing on things that we're never going to make any money out of. Let's look at where we get the best return on investment, focus on that, because if you're swimming in that pool, guess what? That investment starts to grow because you're with the same type of people, like type of people, etc., and that starts to grow rather than a pool where you, as you've said, you're one of 7, you've one of 5, you've one of 6. The client's had 50 CVs. But hasn't made an interview, etc. Why are you going to do anything different? So invest your time wisely. So I think you fix your conversion rate. That will then automatically fix your lead problem because if you're working with the best clients, then they will give you better leads.
Yeah, definitely.
So in a tough market, some leaders, as we know, micromanage every detail, while others go completely offhand and let people do what they want. If you could only focus on 3 things for the next 90 days to build sustainable momentum, what would they be?
It's a great question. And I think you sit there and think only 3. I can think of a number. So attitude, consultant attitude. This is a tough market, no question about it. So how is the consultant at the desk? How is their leader? How is their leader's leader? What is their attitude like? Are they up for it? And you need to know that as a business owner, you need to know that because there's things you can do if you think they're not up for it. If you think their attitude is not as good as it can be, if you think they're just maxed out, they're tired, whatever reason, excuse, whatever it may be, I'd focus on attitude of consultant. I'd focus on their ability to forecast what they're going to do for you week by week. So we're talking about 90 days. Yeah. So what have you done this week? What have you done? What did you say you were going to do? What's the gap? Because the more accurate you can get the forecast over the 90-day period from each of your consultants, you add that up and it begins to bring you belief that actually these guys know what they're doing. This team knows what it's doing. This individual knows what they're doing. And I think that's really important in terms of forecasting because the key things that your FD is going to be looking at is cash. Yeah, your sales director is going to be looking at the KPIs that we've spoken about. The business owner, the investor, if you've got a PE firm involved, they're going to be looking at actually the numbers on the board. So all of that means that you've got to be able to forecast accurately, and that comes down to the consultant at the desk. So ask the questions that show that they can forecast. And the last thing is quality of conversation. Go back all the way to the beginning of 11 o'clock, and we're talking about noise. What type of conversations are you having with your clients and your candidates? And are they sensible conversations trying to make sense of the world? And they may not be about business. Yeah, every time we pick up the phone doesn't have to be a business conversation. It can be a conversation about something that you know personally about them, how they're getting on. All, I'm not trying to teach you to suck eggs here, but it's that sense of build rapport, build relationship, build the insight that's really valuable. Because those three things will help build momentum. And if you haven't done any of those for a while, you'll see a change over 90 days if that goes across the board.
Well, I branch manage to a slightly different way of answering the question. First thing I'd look at is my data on my buying clients, who have been really good clients, who have bought, and we have this conversation a lot with clients about what classes as a buying client. And I think on temp, if they haven't bought a temp in the last month, they're no longer a buying client. On contract in 3 months and on perm in 3 months, if they haven't bought a contract or a temp or a perm person in 3 months, they're now a lapsed client. So the first thing I look at is into our buying clients, because our buying clients are more likely to buy from us if we know what service we can provide and how we're doing that. But we've got to understand which are our best buying clients and which are our poor buying clients, because we've already said there's some clients we might have made a placement where we might have been one of 7. We think that's a good placement, but actually the client's a bit of a dog. So we look at that. That's the first place I look. First place I'd focus people on, because it gets easy, quick, fast wins.
Yeah.
And people start to move. Second thing that I'd look at is then lapsed clients. Clients that have fallen through the net, stop buying from us. Why have they stopped buying from us? What are they doing? What's going on? And I start to look at those clients and start to look at what their recruitment management looks like, what their recruitment footfall looks like, what's going on. So again, if I can get those lapsed clients back in, then I'm starting to work on that. And the third thing is what you said. I'd look on mindset and start to build the mindset of people that can actually deliver and work from there. And so if you go back to requirements, if you're telling people to stop working requirements where they've got a 0 chance of placing and start investing in your ex-buying clients, your lapsed clients, or new business, all of a sudden things start to change and things start to increase. If we're starting to think that you've got 90 days to change your business to create sustainable momentum, you want to be measuring the little things that grow, because I don't think in those 90 days it's going to generate that much cash. The cash will come after the 90 days. If you start to measure the difference in the people from week 1 to week 4, all of a sudden they'll start to build. They've got better quality jobs they're working with better quality clients, they've got better information coming through, and they might be building a pipeline not for today, but for 2 months' time, 3 months' time, 6 months' time, and you can suddenly start to see what's happening in the future rather than what's just happening today, because we base all our reviews about what's happening today. So I'll be starting to look at that and to build and create momentum. So it might not bring money in today, but it starts to create and build that momentum. So if I know that a business is doing a project in November, then I've been marking that in November and saying, right, I've got that, right. So what do I need to do to make sure that I capitalize on that client? What am I doing? So all the time I'm forward projecting what potential I could have, and that'll come out my buying clients, my lapsed clients, okay, but it'll come out the mindset of our consultants. And when we can start to see the gaps, then we can start to refill those gaps and drive that. So I think it's a really important thing that when we start to look at that 90 days momentum starts to create. Once cash starts to flow through, that momentum starts to accelerate again. And I think that's, again, what people think about when we talk to them about do this. They're expecting it to generate cash straight away. It doesn't.
No, it doesn't. No.
It creates momentum in the first 3 or 4 weeks. It starts to create momentum. The cash doesn't come until month 4, 3, 4, 5, and 6, depending on your payment terms, etc. So you think it takes you 4 weeks to maybe warm a client up, get a job off a client, 4 weeks to fill it, okay, 30 days to pay it. So that's your 90 days already gone. So all of a sudden, you've got to start to think that your cash doesn't come straight away. So what are you doing to create momentum based on the things that build the business? Quality clients, quality jobs, okay, and then looking at the quality of the attitude of the people working those things. So I'll be really intrigued on your answer on this one. This is the last question of the day, so I'm going to really be intrigued on this, okay? We spend a lot of time with different clients of different sizes, from solopreneurs to clients plus 250 people, etc., etc. When you're advertising, sort of advising a recruitment leader whose business is hemorrhaging money, morale is rock bottom, what's the first thing you tell them to do tomorrow morning?
It's a difficult, I think, firstly, in our role as well, but it's to just to understand the position of where they're at. Yeah, show some empathy, take them out of the situation, and then go back to basics and say, what steps can you take to change, and what can you change? Break it down. Yeah, if you're hemorrhaging cash, is it because you haven't got enough work in, you've got too much cost in the business? You know, let's break it down. And my role, our role, the role that we would want to, we regard ourselves as here to serve and help recruitment leaders owning their businesses, because it's a joy to do it when it's going wrong. It's to be able to get that joy back when things are really tough. So it's about looking at the steps. What are the steps? Is it a leadership issue? Is it a cash issue? Write down all the steps, and then I'd be sitting with them going, right, so what can we change? And clearly, if they're hemorrhaging cash and morale is low, and these things are going to be done quickly. So we could be talking 24, 48 hours, 72 hours, as opposed to 3 or 4 weeks. So what can you, as the leader, be the leader of an office or the leader of a business or the leader of a division, what can you do in the next 24 hours, 48 hours to begin to change things? Because as leaders, as people, we also are confidence players. When things are tough or tougher, it knocks your confidence. Because we, as leaders, we have to show to the outside world and to our teams that actually everything's all right. But what if it isn't? So how do you get that confidence back? And that's the thing that I'd be looking at for the first, for those first few days. Because if it's as desperate as the question implies, you've got to do something quickly.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think it's all about attitude. If you think you're going under, you're going to go under. If you think you're going to survive, there's a high chance that you will survive. And it's about putting that positive mental attitude first and foremost. And that becomes quite infectious to the rest of the business. And then it's about what you're talking about, right? Do what you need to do to ensure that money stops hemorrhaging and morale starts to change. To start to measure the right things, stop flogging your people and start to look at the people and what's going on. And I was thinking, when you're in a corner, who do you want stood in your corner with you? Who do you want stood there that's going to fight for you? So again, it goes about, have you got the right people in the right places doing the right things? So I would be aligning my workforce, who's going to actually commit to this, who's going to do that, and I'd be having, right, this is where we are, this is where we're going to, this is what we're going to do to get there. And I think as leaders, you've got to lead from the front, and you've got to lead absolutely from the front, and that means having clear, concise, measurable targets that you're trying to achieve. And that's not all about the cash, that's about all the little things and celebrating every little win along the way. And I think if you went in tomorrow and said, right, this is where we're going, you spell it out, you get everybody on the plan and you drive the plan. And I think it's important that businesses have a plan, have a structure to move themselves forward, rather than have that, we hope the market's going to change, we hope the money carries on. We've got to sit there and say, right, where's the places that we could absolutely affect here and now to create momentum? And we know, Dave, because we're working with a number of clients that are in this situation and trying to drive that. And that's the thing that we started to change. We started to change the attitude of the management team and the owners to drive them forward and get them that they can move forward, that they can achieve where they want to be.
And the other thing, how to do that we found as well is making sure that the leader knows exactly the position they're in. So hemorrhage your cash. So how much have you got? Can you survive for another 3 months, 3 days? I remember going in as a CEO of a business that was on AIM. And when we actually looked at the spreadsheets and the Excel and all that, and looked at the finances, one of our issues was that we had one client that was 45% of our turnover. But when you looked at what that meant was, and this is a little while ago, but it still pertains today. I could look and sit down with our financial controller and work out that actually in 8 weeks, if they didn't pay, we ran out of cash. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're BP, whether you're Ford Motor Company, if you are on AIM, you have a fiduciary duty to report anything that could be a potential cash problem. Whether your share price is 1p or £100,000 a share. So you've got to understand, you've got to make sure that you know the exact position you're in now and in the coming days.
Yeah, and I think it is, knowing your position because you know where you're starting from.
Yes.
But it's not just about where you're starting from; it's what direction are you running.
Yeah.
I always remember that classical.
You're not going to say the Irish joke that I was just thinking.
No. I can't remember whether it was a Spike Milligan sketch or whether it was a Monty Python sketch, but it was about the Olympics, and it was the blind 100-meter race, and the guy fires the gun, and they all run off in different directions.
Yeah.
And that's what you've got.
Yeah.
If you have no direction, then you're going to run in any direction. So you've got to have that focus on where you're going, but know where you're starting from. So they all knew where they were starting from, but no direction where they were going. And I think that's what a lot of businesses do. They just sort of go, oh my God, I'm going to try anything and everything and have no precise direction. And therefore they can neither create momentum and create morale moving forward, because you can't celebrate the little wins because those little wins don't happen. So you've got to have direction in where you're going, but you've got to have that attitude that you're going to achieve and get to where you want to be. And that means having a plan to get there.
Yeah, definitely.
Ladies and gents, thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated. Next week is, I believe, the last week in the series of growth. No, not growth. We're on leadership for Recruitment Leaders Unlocked. That's a really interesting conversation with a rather large client. So it'll be interesting to have a look at that. Week after that, we'll be back on the webinars again. So if there's anything that you want us to talk or discuss about, then send us some headings in, and we'll sort of correct something there. If you haven't had a free 60 minutes session, feel free to give us a call and book one of those sessions in. But other than that, thank you very much. Dave, thanks for your time. Thanks for flying back from Bologna. Great to spend some time with you, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much.
Cheers, everybody. Have a good week. Bye-bye.